Okay, now inflation. So we have been talking about inflation a lot of time. So inflation will usually have three impacts. Okay, so the first one is that inflation usually described when there is an increase in the general price level. So not just some price increases, but in general, most of the things, when their price increases, you will see that their inflation or there's an inflation, right? Now, when the price increases, what will happen is that the value of your money will also drop. Okay, so take an example of inflation, like for example, if it's 2 or 3%, which means that my money has lost their value by 2 or 3%, or it could be my value or my purchasing power has dropped. So wait, let me put an example here. So if in 2023, it only cost me 10 ringgit to buy it, but in 2024, in order for me to buy that same cup of coffee, it has become 50 ringgit. So number one, price has gone up. And number two, the 10 ringgit in 2023, the power of it has changed, because the 10 ringgit back in 2023 does not allow me to buy the same thing in 2024. Okay, so that's when your purchasing power or your value of money has gone down. So here is that when there is an increase in general price level, and when there is a decrease in value of money, and then when there is also a decrease in your purchasing power. So this usually comes when you have inflation. Okay, so what causes inflation to happen? Generally, there are usually three ways that it will happen. So the first one is what they usually call a demand pull inflation. Second is cost push inflation, and the third one is a monetary inflation. Okay, so a demand pull inflation is looking at your diagram. Okay, so this is that when there is an increase in your demand, there will then be an increase in price level. So that would cause your inflation to happen. So that is what they call a demand pull inflation. Okay, now the next one is that I just now moved my AD. So now I want to keep my AD constant. Okay, I want to keep my aggregate demand constant. So the only way that I can have an increase in price by changing my supply is that I have a decrease in AS. Okay, so in this case, I have a decrease in aggregate supply. And what causes the supplier or what causes people to supply lesser is usually your cost. So the higher the cost, the lesser supply I would have, right? So they call this a cost push inflation because you're basically pushing your supply curve inward. So cost push inflation is usually caused by a decrease in your aggregate supply, and the reason is that there is an increase in your cost of production. So these are the two methods that we would see I have an increase in price or when I have an inflation. So two methods or two causes that your inflation can happen. And this is what you have to remember throughout. The last one is not so important and seldom come out. So the first is again increase in demand, which causes your price level to go up. That is your demand pull inflation. Then the next one is your cost push inflation, which is caused by a decrease in AS, which causes your price to go up. right? Now, the last one, which is what they call a monetary inflation, or sometimes it's called an imported inflation, right? So a monetary inflation is caused by your two things. The most common one is your exchange rate. And the second one is that the other country inflation is higher than your country's inflation. Okay, I'm going to talk about the last one first because it's easiest. So if you buy things from, let's say, UK, and UK has a very high inflation, let's say UK has a 9% inflation, and you are only having a 3% inflation. So when you import things from UK, obviously everything is going to increase by 9%, and you're going to bring the higher price to your country, produce, and then you're going to set the price. And of course, your base would now be higher. So when foreign inflation is higher than your country's inflation, your cost of production will usually also increase. And that causes you to basically like sort of bring in the inflation or bring in the higher prices to your country. So that is the second one. Now for exchange rate, so take an example, if I have my US dollar against Malaysia ringgit. So let's say in 2022 and 2023, I have $1 to 4 ringgit and 20 cents and $1 to 4 ringgit and 60 cents. Okay, so this is basically the exchange rate. I express US dollar in terms of Malaysian ringgit or Malaysian ringgit in terms of US dollar, right? So in 2022, $1 can buy 4 ringgit and 20 cents. Now in 2023, $1 can buy 4 ringgit and 60 cents. So if we are in Malaysia and I'm trying to buy a thing that is worth $100. So in 2022, how much I would pay in Malaysia ringgit? I would basically pay 420. But in 2023, I would need to pay an extra $40, 40 ringgit, because my exchange rate has changed. Or in this case, my exchange rate has become weaker. Now, because your exchange rate become weaker, what happened is that when you buy things from foreign or when you import things, your value or your cost will become higher. And that causes your base also to become higher locally. And that's when you can contribute to higher inflation. So we usually call this type of inflation, or because of exchange rate, your prices increases, we call this an imported inflation. Okay, so I'm just gonna put a box here.